Hello everybody, welcome once again to another Stormgate Esports recap. So we're gonna be in a pretty busy week and I'm gonna be talking about a little bit of the meta at the end of the video, but let's go ahead and start out with the first congratulations of the week. Congratulations Probe for winning the Tasteless Showdown. An incredible little bit of a maneuver here from him by winning against Parting, who was absolutely the favorite to win it all. And then also congratulations Laser, who went down 3-0 against Parting as not only the initial round but the first match that we saw ever in this Tasteless Showdown, outside of the Moon MC show match above, but then came back and returned the favor with Infernals against Celestials. And we'll talk a little bit about this sort of Celestial Infernal and a Vanguard dynamic once we get a little bit later on. But again, congratulations Probe, really good wins. I wasn't able to watch all of the matches, of course, because they were at Korean time and that is like in the middle of the night for me, but very good display. The replays, we don't have them yet, so if you want to watch the replays, you're gonna have to go through the VODs, but there are multiple channels that you can pick from, and I know a couple of people have been sort of not reacting but co-streaming to them, so you should definitely check them out. And there will probably be many content creators doing like replay reviews of it or going through that phase. The next topic to talk about is the Alpha Navigators Cup. So we have, let's go ahead and start with EMEA, so the European bracket. 23 players in the bracket, very happy with the turnout. And in the top 8, we had Bosi, Lorimbo, B, Don, Ilya, KRS, MSRM, Kel, and Captain Alex. And the eventual winner was B, so congratulations to him, who actually switched over to Celestials for the first 2 games against KRS, and then finished out with Isle of Dread. There was actually a $50 bounty here for somebody winning without using Celestials, but using it twice disqualified B for it. Take that as whatever you will, but very interesting, no Vanguards here whatsoever. It was just Infernals and Celestials, and it wasn't just that there were very few Celestials. The Celestials players that were there did ended up making it through, and this will obviously have a little bit of an impact on the season standings. As for the Americas bracket, a very similar turnout, 24 players. And we had a non-Americas finals for the Americas bracket. We actually had Bosi from Sweden going up against Percival from Korea, who was playing, thankfully, the real Nan Man, one of the people who is co-streaming. They also jump into livecast the matches. He's in the Americas, so he was able to provide a neutral server for both players, and it was a great series. And in Americas, the story was a little bit different. There were a good number of Vanguard players that went through. Percival, of course. I think one of the standouts that doesn't really show up here in the bracket is Yu. So Yu is an Australian player, and he went through the Swiss stage undefeated. He went 5-0. He did have a couple of fights with primarily Celestials players, so take that as you will, but he did give Mixu a run for his money on a 2-1 series, and I just spotted this error that I'm gonna be fixing after the video. But of course there were a couple of other Celestials that we have actually seen in the past. So Fana, for instance, has played in the Alpha Navigators Cup before, but it is a good win for Percival here on the top 8. And again, that is going to have some repercussions for the season standings, which we're going to check out in a moment. I do want to say that if you want the replays from the Alpha Navigators Cup, they are already up, so you can go and look at all of them. All the top 8 matches have the replays up already, and there are a couple of Swiss matches as well if you want to check those out. So going into the season standings there, how are things looking? Well, Percival has gone up. Those 50 points are going to be very good. B is now kind of coming close to Bosi's position, but Bosi also went up with another 2nd place here and has a pretty good chance here to qualify on the automatic qualifications. Captain Alex as well. Theory is now going to be back from Korea since he went and played on the Tasteless Showdown, so maybe we'll see him on the following tanks, but we'll talk about that later. As for calendar updates, what is happening here? You might have noticed that the event that was supposed to happen from the 30th onward has been taken out. I know the event exists, but it hasn't been announced, so I'm just kind of holding out and waiting to see what happens. It might be sort of broadcasted as replays or something along those lines. I have no idea. I cannot tell you guys anything about it. So unfortunately, that is that. But we finished out the very first week here. We're heading into the second one. We have the Czech stars, which has their registration date moved. So if you wanted to participate in that, you still have today, when this video goes out, to go ahead and register for it. There is also a little show match from IamTKL, who is a French streamer. Got a couple of good players to play for him. We're gonna check out who in a second. We also have TANC 15, of course, and I'm going to be showing you that, as well as the Infolet Tournament 1, which is a invitational tournament being put together by Snogstar, one of the top players that you can see on the ladder at the moment. So, looking forward to what's happening. Czech Stars, it already has about 13 registered players, as last I checked. Let's go ahead and pull it up. Yet, 13th. Sorry that it is in Spanish, I cannot change it. But there are the groups. They did say in their Discord, in the sort of Discord thread in the official Stormgate Discord, that they will be doing the drawing of the groups live. So if you want to check that out, you absolutely should. And there are good names here. I want to kind of stress that it might be original, but there are some legitimately good games here, like Captain Alex, like Kras. These are two players that play on tank that get really good result. Exodus was also playing in the most recent tank. So these are definitely players that you might want to check out their matches in the group stages when they get them. So the IamTKL Showdown is for about 100 euros. It is going to be Bosi versus Denver. Obviously, we've talked about Bosi before. Very, very good player. Denver is a fantastic Vanguard player. He actually played in one of the tanks before. I think he actually won one of them. We'll have to check. But he's a really good player. He doesn't play in a lot of tournaments yet, but I imagine that is going to change as we move forward to more and more matches. So this showmatch, sorry, it might give us a little bit of an insight as to how he's going to be playing Vanguards into other tournaments. So the Alpha Navigators Cup 15 is going to be coming up on Saturday, as always. There are already a bunch of people who signed up. If you haven't signed up already, as with all of the items that I'm talking about here today, you will find links in the description for them. So you can go ahead and register. There is no entry fee. Everybody's more than welcome. It doesn't matter your skill level, and you can do that. So then the last piece that we're going to have this week on Sunday, it is going to be the Infolet Tournament 1. So this is being put together by Snogstar, as I said, and is being sponsored by Infolet, a software IT company from what I gather. And it has a good number of players, primarily European players, but some Americans snuck into the bracket. You have Albino from Aftermath, you have Anticity, you have Prime Scout. So Prime Scout is a sort of organizer, but also a very good high-level player. Jordoser Lorimbo, who is a fantastic Infernal player who has not been that active in tournaments, but it's good to see him here on the bracket. Luelius, who was playing in one of the tanks before, is here as well. Snogstar and Aurel, who is organizing another tournament. So you can see that this is all, you know, people who you know if you've been watching these recaps so far, and they're going to be playing a top 8. Has a few prizes up for grabs, $80 in play, so not that big of a deal, but still pretty good to see some tournaments, even invitationals, kind of popping up. Finally, the sort of big boy on the block that is that has been announced finally is Stormgate Nexus. So Stormgate Nexus, you might know them from their articles, sort of recapping some of the news that are happening with Stormgate, and this is of course put in part by Biomorph, one fantastic caster that is jumping in at the opportunity to do some Stormgate stuff. So they've put together a tournament sponsored by, I'm gonna butcher this name terribly, Herenia Capital, maybe? Something like that. A financial group, it seems, that has an interest in putting together a tournament. It's $2,000, so I would definitely say, hey, you should maybe give it a shot. And it has a qualifier for 3 separate regions. So you have the Asia Pacific qualifier, the EMEA qualifier, and the Americas qualifier. Interesting to know that the Americas qualifier only has 2 spots for the main event. The main event has 8 invited players, as well as those that qualify. So if you are in Americas, you're going to need to fight just a little bit harder to be one of the 2 players that goes through. And when I say fight, I do genuinely mean it. I think the EMEA bracket already has something like 20 players in it. Let's go ahead and check that out for a second. 19 players, yeah, pretty much. So this is gonna be a pretty tough fight to get one of those 3 spots, and I imagine it's gonna be a similar story on the other ones. And although I'm not organizing this and I'm not an admin, I still would encourage you to go ahead and give it a shot. This is gonna be happening on the 25th, so we still have one more sort of week cycle before this becomes super relevant, but it has been announced on the past week, so I definitely want to get it out on a video. Finally, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the meta. I'm not a top player, so I'm definitely not going to be able to give you a very detailed breakdown of my thoughts on how things are going. We know from a few statements that Frostjam has made that they are going to be looking to release a balance patch targeting primarily Celestials over a certain amount of time. I'm not entirely sure what the dates would be on that one or what the contents of the patch would be, but they said that something is coming. So hopefully this week, maybe next week, before the sort of full free-to-play release of the game happens. Overall, if you haven't been tuning into the meta, first of all, what are you doing in a video recapping the esports side of things when you don't know anything about the game? And secondly, it's primarily been that Celestials have a very good opener, and if they go to rush their opponents, they have a really good position. They usually don't require a lot of investment on the Celestial side, and they can sort of flip over to some macro games if needed, if the initial rush doesn't work. But at the moment, the initial rush is working really well. It requires a lot of like precise decisions on the side of either the Infernal or the Vanguard player to be able to sustain it, and usually the commitment that you need to do on your defense as either of those factions results in you having a worse economical position against the Celestial player going into the mid and late game. Now, what has been interesting is that the few times that initial push has successfully been repelled and the player who is not playing Celestial goes on to have a micro game, there is a little bit of a twist in that Vanguard and Infernal players are able to get into a late game where they have a slightly better position than the Celestial. So it seems like it's very much leaning towards an early game that is dominated by Celestials, and then as they go on, Celestials kind of lose their edge in that way. Now again, not a top player, wouldn't be able to tell you fully the details of why that's happening exactly. It's going to be interesting to see what does shake up with the patch. I have this slight suspicion, because I've seen a number of Vanguard players have really good late games, especially things like Mixu, for instance, that has gone far on something like the Alpha Navigators Cup. And the suspicion that I have is that depending how the patch lands and depending what the nodes and the changes are exactly, we could be looking at a Vanguard not dominated, but definitely favor late game. The Atlases are very powerful, the Exos are incredibly powerful, they are a sort of marquee unit for the faction at the moment, and you really cannot go wrong in making them. They seem just overall one of your best units as the Vanguard, replacing many of the other things that you would have out on the map. Like for instance, something like a Vulcan, it loses out speed, it's a little bit more unwieldy to use than just the massive Exos that you're microing against your opponent. And that could mean that if Vanguards are not touched at all and they're given free reign, I could see them have a very powerful late game if they get to that late game. There is, however, an undercurrent that Infernals have the better economic ramp up. So whenever you see a match between Infernals and Vanguards, and I think I've seen this quite a bit on some of those tank replays, you end up in a situation where the Infernal player gets control over the map, and they are doing a little bit of creeping, but not too much, but they have a better economic position. It's just that the defender's advantage for the Vanguard, thanks to the Sentry Post, as well as the Atlases, the Vulcans, the Medtechs, they kind of get to sustain themselves a little bit more than some other factions would be able to, in this case like an Infernal versus Infernal or an Infernal versus a Celestial matchup that goes into the mid game. And what I think is interesting is that eventually either the Vanguard player breaks through and is able to flip the map over to themselves, get the Infernal Smother out, and that eventually kills the Infernal player because they don't have the capability to control the map and move their units. Or you have a situation where the Infernal player just kind of sits on waits and harasses whatever pokes the Vanguard players tries to do. I think this is something that sort of happened in the Bosi versus Mixu semi-finals, and the tank votes are going to be going up all throughout this week, but you can check them out on my Twitch already, or see the replay for yourself, where Bosi was able to grab hold of the map and keep Mixu in 3 bases, maybe having a sort of quote-unquote a free 4th base that he was always with vision on or trying to keep an eye on it. And eventually what wound up happening is that although Mixu had an army that could maybe best Bosi in a 1v1, it only needed like a couple of fights that really didn't go in the direction of Mixu to be able to take the map. And I think that was a very interesting dynamic that might not require a patch to fix, and it might just necessitate the players competing more and trying to figure out more what to do on the late game. But I definitely think a patch addressing Celestials on the early game and maybe some other economic and ramp up things throughout the game would be very good. I've said this in my stream, I think, a couple of times. I think creep camps right now are struggling to be useful at the moment. They have very good buffs, and those buffs are very, very powerful. But there is a line where it's sometimes better to just try and harass your opponent rather than go for a creep camp. And it seems like we've fallen into the side of, well, I'd rather just try to harass the worker line or the bases from my opponent than try to get the benefit of one of the camps that are out there. Primarily because the resource camps, the ones for Luminite and Ethereum, are now level 2 starting out always, which means that they are much harder to take. And so if you cannot damage the economy of your opponent, you would ideally want to boost your own. However, boosting your own means potentially having to sacrifice a lot more units to those Luminites and Ethereum camps. So maybe there is an adjustment there to be made so that those particular resource camps become a little bit more viable. But again, we'll see what Frost Giant decides to do. I imagine that they are going to be getting a patch done relatively quickly, but for the moment, we're just going to have to sit and wait and see what happens with all of these tournaments. And that is the recap for this week. Thank you once again, everybody, for watching. Hopefully you liked it. If you did, consider subscribing. That is always very helpful, as well as liking the video. If you want more Stormgate content, don't worry. There's going to be videos coming up every single day throughout this week, which are going to be replays from my casted games of the Alpha Navigators Cup. Once again, thank you so much for watching, everybody, and have a wonderful day.